Welcome back. We're going to talk about European diplomacy in a couple of short lectures here. This is by no means a history of European diplomacy. We'd be here the rest of our lives. But what I do want to do is introduce you to some sort of key terms and concepts or practices or strategies used over the years, over the last half millennia in Europe, and give you some notion of the significance of these practices. I think this will be helpful to you when we get to the 20th century, when we get to the Great Wars, the First and Second World Wars in the 20th century. Maybe you can, some of this will sort of bubble up again, and you can see how some of these European diplomatic themes track back through time. So let's introduce European diplomacy here. Some of this you've heard of, and some of this you will hear again. 17th century, Cardinal Richelieu of France introduced the modern method of foreign policy based on the state's national interest, as opposed to any other sort of interest, particularly religious interest, for instance. In the 18th century, Great Britain elaborated the concept of the balance of power. This will dominate European diplomacy for the next 200 years. Also in the 19th century, at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, you have the settlement at Vienna, and we created here what's called the Concert of Europe. That is, certain European states acting in concert together as an alliance. Again, this is after the tumult and chaos of the Napoleonic Wars. And then in the second half of the 19th and then the early 20th centuries, you get the rise of Bismarck, the cobbling together of all those small German states that used to make up the Holy Roman Empire. Bismarck's going to weld these together into modern Germany. He's going to reshape European diplomacy into sort of a cold-blooded power game. So we can call this power politics, or in the French term, realpolitik, real politics. A little background here. The medieval dream of a universal empire in Europe had failed. This universal empire, based partly on Christianity, had been shattered by the Reformation. The Christian unity of Europe has ended. It's also based in part on this lingering notion of the unity created by the Roman Empire in Europe. But again, this is clearly a failure. The Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 demonstrates this quite clearly. Here, Richelieu's practice of putting the nation-state's interest above religious unity creates a scandal in Europe. France, a Catholic country, at war with the Habsburgs, Catholic domains, yet Richelieu, the sort of foreign minister of France, subsidizes a Protestant army from Sweden to attack the Habsburgs in Central Europe. Sort of an unprecedented break with religious loyalty. Europe's multi-state system was unique, and from this are created these concepts of the nation state, of national sovereignty, the balance of power. Of course, we still hear these terms today. And again, let's extend this balance of power a bit. Balance of power is based on Great Britain's fear that a dominant European country could threaten Britain's control of the seas and her independence. Britain is, after all, an island, and her Navy and merchant marine bring food and fuel and other things back to the island. So a dominant European power has also always been feared in England's eyes because they could impose either commercial or military opposition to the English. Let's continue with background here and talk a little bit about the Holy Roman Empire. We've already discussed this before, but it bears repeating. Located in the heart of Central Europe, the empire sought unity based on Christianity and the lingering ideas of the ancient Roman Empire. And then on the periphery of the Holy Roman Empire, you have those states that border the Atlantic, Spain, England, France. They don't accept the authority of the Holy Roman Empire. After the Reformation, the Holy Roman Emperor was perceived in Protestant lands less as an agent of God than a sort of a corrupt warlord tied to the Antichrist, a common name for the Pope. Protestant leaders are going to break from Rome, from Catholicism. Protestant leaders broke the religious universality of Catholicism in Europe. Protestant leaders no longer saw loyalty to the Holy Roman Emperor as any sort of religious duty. Protestant leaders said the empire was neither holy, nor Roman, nor even an empire. Now, back to Richelieu for a moment, the practice of raison d'etat, the reason of state. So the notion of a European empire based on Christianity, based on notions of the Roman Empire has been shattered. So how are we going to regulate our relations with each other, these nation states? How are we going to justify this breaking away or this shattering of Christian unity? They found it. The nation states found it in this concept, raison d'etat, the interests of state overall. And they found it in this notion of the balance of power to keep any one particular state from becoming dominant. Raison d'etat asserted that the well-being of the state justified whatever means were employed to further its interest. The national interests of the state supplanted the medieval notion of universal morality. Again, Cardinal Richelieu essentially began this practice. You can see it fully formed at the Treaty of Westphalia, or at least the results of it. It's interesting. Upon learning of Richelieu's death, Pope Urban VIII is alleged to have said, quote, "If there's a God, Cardinal Richelieu will have much to answer for." You can imagine the Pope's dismay that a Catholic Cardinal Richelieu is aiding Protestants against other Catholics in the Holy Roman Empire. Of course, Richelieu came to office in 1624 and guided French policy the rest of his life. The Habsburg Emperor Ferdinand II, of course, is attempting to revive a Catholic empire there in Central Europe. Ferdinand's trying to stamp out Protestantism. Ferdinand's trying to establish imperial control over this central Germanic region of Europe. Of course, Richelieu helped to prevent Ferdinand achieving his goals by financing Protestant war efforts. Sweden's Gustavus Adolphus brings his army into the mainland of Europe and helps to foil Ferdinand II's ambitions. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. Both Richelieu and Ferdinand, at war with each other, are both Catholic. The Swedish king is Protestant, yet Richelieu supports him. That Cardinal Richelieu should subsidize a Protestant attack on the Catholic Holy Roman Empire had implications as profound as the upheavals of the French Revolution. So we've already talked about 30 Years' War. This is essentially a Habsburg attempt to unify Germany. Richelieu thwarted the Habsburgs and the Holy Roman Empire by keeping it comprised of small, weak German principalities and kingdoms that could pose no threat to France. The German rulers of each of these little principalities and kingdoms, of course, could determine the religion that would be practiced in their kingdom. The Treaty of Augsburg, I believe, is the treaty that made this possible. Let's continue a little bit further here. Louis XIV's pursuit of raison d'etat alarmed the rest of Europe and triggered an anti-French coalition. An example of the balance of power. France under Louis XIV is becoming too powerful, beginning to exert its dominance outside of French borders. Therefore, the other the other European states gather in an alliance to prevent French domination. Again, William of Orange, we talked about the English Civil War. William of Orange assumed power in England in the Glorious Revolution of 1688. We talked about that last time. William of Orange brought England into the anti-French alliance against Louis XIV. Balance of power. William of Orange's decision to send English troops to fight for present-day Belgium, or what we call Belgium today, against France was a precursor of the British decision to fight for Belgium when Germany invaded it in 1914. Here we're talking about the Great War, or World War I. And we'll see this strategy reappear again in 1914 when the English seek to prevent Germany from dominating the European continent. Now, as a result, France would remain the strongest power in Europe, but it would not be dominant overall. A textbook case of the balance of power. Let's take a short break. We'll come back at the next lecture and look at the concert of Europe.